Hello everybody, this is Huss and welcome to The Perfect Story. This is video 5 and we're going to talk about settings in series and world building. So if you haven't seen what we'll cover, this is it right here. We're about halfway through the series and we have 5 more videos to go until the end of The Perfect Story. So this one is going to start with world building, and it really depends on your genre how much you need to build your world. But the purpose of world building is to immerse your reader in the story and provide important details about location as it pertains to the story. So world building is more than just describing the surroundings around you. It's mostly explaining the culture of the people in your book. And you can have the book set in a very contemporary city like I do in Denver or Huntington Beach or any other places that I usually set my books. And you still have to explain the culture depending on what you're writing about, even in romance. Because world building is not that big of a deal in romance, because obviously romance readers read romance books for the romance. And most of the romance doesn't have a whole lot to do with the world that it's built around. But it can if your couple is in an exotic location, so you want to let the reader experience those things as they go through the story, because especially in romance, people are reading the story to escape and enjoy a little fantasy, and so they want to know what the locations are like, and they want to feel like they're there with your character. In science fiction and fantasy, the world building is everything, so you really have to take time to build your culture. It's usually in the future, and so there are a lot of things to explain politically and stuff like that you would never really want to get into in a romance. Okay, so what do your readers want to know about your world? Well, you, of course, are the best person to answer the question because you know the world better than anybody else. And again, it has to do with your genre. So if you have written books before, you know what the world is, and you pretty much know what the readers enjoyed, and maybe you got some feedback on stuff that they didn't. But if you're a new author, you're going to have to pretend you are your ideal reader and write the world the way you like it. And just, I always tell you, if you want to learn how to write a character or write a scene or plot a book or write dialogue, any of these things, the best thing to do is just go find your favorite book and read it again, asking yourself these questions along the way. Why do I like this book? So if you can think of a book that you really enjoyed the world and you just didn't want to leave, and you are a pretty new writer, or maybe you just haven't gotten the hang of this even though you've published before, you should go and read that book again and ask yourself, what did this author do right? And then try and repeat it in your own way. Don't copy them, of course, but just try and repeat what they did and the way they made you love the world. Now, if readers have issues with your world building, if you see a lot of these comments in your reviews, you might want to go, pay a little more attention to it and try and see where you went wrong and come up with solutions. However, if you've been publishing for a while and you have fans and they're enjoying your world, and you suddenly get a rash of new readers that say, this world building wasn't any good, well, too bad. Maybe those aren't your fans, and so you shouldn't bother with those readers' opinions. So just because you get a few reviews saying one thing or another about anything that you do in your story, it doesn't mean it needs changing. Because if you're making fans happy, the casual reader doesn't matter. Okay? You never want to change what you're doing for the casual reader when you have fans, because you're just going to piss off the people who love you the most. So keep that in mind. I see this a lot in young adult, because I read a lot of young adult science fiction and fantasy, and these fucking bitches are always like, oh, this world building. There was one not too long ago, and that had that in a review, and I was just thinking, Jesus fucking Christ, man. this bitch just built this world like out of nowhere, and it's like so complicated you almost don't want to keep going. So how could she have built the world, made it richer? I don't think she could have. I think maybe the reader is confused and maybe they find the world boring, which is fine. But in the review they said didn't do a good job world building. Well, I'm going to have to say you didn't do a good job writing that review, because I think her world building was very thorough. Doesn't mean people have to like it. It just means she did her job. So keep that in mind. You don't want to fall for any of these new reader complaints, because they're not going to propel you forward. A new reader who is not automatically a fan is not somebody you need to be taking advice from. Ever. Okay, so world building depends on genre, just like I said. So you have to pay attention to what your genre rules are. Like in science fiction and fantasy, everything is about the world building, right? You have to have cool pieces of futuristic tech, and you have to have a new political system, and you have to change the culture around, and you have to anticipate what it's going to be like in the future and how people of today can relate to that and all kinds of stuff, right? In romance, you don't need any of that shit, okay? You just need enough to satisfy the reader experience. And what I mean by reader experience is by giving them the fantasy, so that if, it's a billionaire book, because I write mostly billionaire books. If it's a billionaire book, you have to make the guy kind of interesting based on, his net worth, obviously. And so he's living in a cool house, or he drives something cool like a car or motorcycle, or maybe has a boat or a helicopter, 50 Shades, anyone. And so all these things are part of your world building, and it's also part of characterization too. So you're kind of killing two things with one topic here in romance. So romance doesn't need as much as science fiction and fantasy. And it'll just bore them to death. So some examples that I just pulled off the top of my head of great world building would be anything by Stephen King, of course, because if you've read a lot of Stephen King, like, that guy can build a world like nobody's business. He's great at characterization. I mean, there's few things that King excels at, and world building is one of them. And of course, George R.R. Martin for the Game of Thrones series, that's on HBO right now. If you read the books, then you know what his world building is. Sometimes it's like so detailed, you're like, who cares what they're eating, or who cares what her dress looks like? But really, people who enjoy fantasy, like epic long fantasy like that, really like that stuff. And I'm not an epic fantasy reader, and even though there were certain parts of the books where I was feeling that way, like maybe I'll just skip over this, I still did enjoy it. And so he should never change his style for somebody like me, because I'm not a super fan, I'm just a casual fan. And so I'm just going to have to deal with it if I want to read his book. Another great world building story is The New West World on HBO that just ended, they just ended their first season not too long ago. And that was fantastic. Like, it was really good, because it was combining, an Old West scenario with futuristic things on the outside world, and these crazy robots and that look just like people. And so that world building just top notch. Another one that I came to mind was the Lost series, because I was really into Lost for a while it was on. And it was a great world building experience because the writers took you off the island to show the characters in their real world. So you got like the island version world, and you got the real world, and it all kind of mixed together to make this fantastic mystery. And then the last one I have on here is Amy Tan, and I just pulled her out because I enjoy her books, and her books are mostly about Chinese culture, and The Joy Luck Club is probably the best known one that I really liked a lot, and it's about Chinese American women. And so she has to be very careful to build her world, because it's a non-Western culture. Even though sometimes her characters are living in America, she's always referencing back to China. That's one thing that I want to stress here is, if you are writing non-American cultures and you're selling to an American audience, And you should be selling to an American audience. Sorry for every other country out there, but America is the biggest reading audience on the planet. So you do want to pay attention to what their preferences are. So if you're writing non-American cultures and selling to American audience, world building is very important. So I have this one series that I'm thinking about. It's a romance series set in Australia, and I read it several years ago. It's called Boys of Summer, and I really just loved the world. Like, I'm not sure, like, the plot was all that great. The romance was good, and but I really just wanted to just sit inside that story and read along and just take up the Australian culture, right? So world building is very important if you're writing non-American cultures, but you're selling to an American audience, because you want to give them the experience. Also, if an American reader picks up your non-USA centric book, they do it because they really want to, okay? They really want to immerse themselves in that culture. So you should give them what they want, right? And this same goes for any non-Western cultures, like I referenced Amy Tan in the Joy Luck Club and her other books. Because if for instance, I go pick up a book about Chinese Americans, it's because I want to know more about Chinese Americans. I don't want, the whole American side to them. I'm interested in both. So if you're writing those kinds of books, you need to pay more attention to your world building and realize that people who are going to pick it up are going to be interested in what you have to say, so you should take your time and do it right. Okay, so I said romance doesn't really require a whole lot of world building. However, romance does have a lot of subgenres. Things like sexy cowboys, or sexy cage fighters, or sexy assassins, or sexy race car drivers, or sexy Navy SEALs, right? Insert sexy in front of everything and given an occupation, and romance has a genre for it. So if you're going to write cowboys, right, you got to know your way around fucking cowboy, okay? So you have to build that little cowboy world. Same thing with all the rest of these. If you're going to write assassins, you better know your way around a gun. Because, no, you don't need a lot of it, but the few paragraphs and sentences and pages that you have in there that do pertain to the actual world need to be believable. And you don't have to describe the gun and tell the caliber of a bullet or anything like that you're putting in your assassin's hands. But you need to have some kind of analogy that people can relate to when they're reading as far as the romance goes. So niche settings require better world building, because now you've taken yourself out of just plain old contemporary romance and thrown yourself into the sexy cowboy world or whatever. Also, when you're niche world building in romance, you have to remember that the romance comes first. So maybe this cowboy is like trying to be the best bull rider in the world. I don't know, because I don't write cowboys, but maybe that's his goal. You don't want to let his goal in the niche overpower the actual romance. So I'm always telling myself this because I'm writing the assassin stuff and all this shadow government secret stuff, and I have to constantly remind myself as I'm writing that, okay, the shadow government and the assassins are fun and cool, but if I don't have a great romance in there, bitches aren't interested, okay? So you always have to remind yourself that the romance comes first. It doesn't matter what niche you're in, because your readers will just get bored and start skimming pages, and then you'll see reviews like, didn't read it, did not finish, or skimmed half of it just to get to the end, which was okay. You don't want reviews like that. So keep them interesting by remembering the romance. However, but adding too little world building will not allow them to immerse themselves in the experience. And so you got to kind of decide which of your settings in your scenes need more attention than others. So if I'm writing a book where a girl is on vacation in St. Thomas, well, that's a tropical island that most of us have not been to. I haven't been there. So when I was researching it, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Let's talk about the sand. Let's talk about the sun. Let's talk about the resort. And other scenes, it doesn't have the same effect. So with that said, I think you should write the story the way you want. And again, this is especially important if you have a loyal fan base. Do not fall for the new reader's opinion and change what works, because the new reader doesn't count yet. Now, if the new reader turns into a fan, then you start taking them seriously. But the new reader, like, this is my first book from J.A. Huss, and I, didn't really care for it. Well, all right. Well, there's 500 other fucking reviews that are 5 stars that said they loved it. So why would I care? I don't. And you shouldn't either. So, what does world building include? Of course, like the geography, like where are you? Are you in Denver? Are you in Cheyenne? Are you in Los Angeles? Of course, your readers need to know that. Now, I guess you could get away, like some people invent towns. I know some writers who invent small towns or, and they set it in the small town. I don't do that. I just find it easier to pick a fucking city and then use it as a model, but to each his own. So you got to know where they're at. What kind of weather do they have there? Because you're going to have to know, like, are they wearing a jacket when they leave the house? Is she wearing a strapless dress with no coat in January and she has open-toe shoes on walking through the snow? Like, that's stuff you need to know. Plus, it helps the reader like feel like they're there if they know like the wind is in her face or it's starting to rain or something like that. And also weather can also mimic emotions. Right? If there is a big cloudy sky over the mountains, I use that one a lot. I'm like, clouds are coming over the mountains, that means something bad's coming. So you could do stuff like that too. You have to know the politics and ideology of your I wouldn't say even your characters, but just the general area, because most romances don't give a shit about politics and ideology, right? Like, you mostly aren't putting any of that into there. And if you are, you better tread carefully, number one. And number two, if you are, because it's part of your story, then it's more in an ambiguous way. You don't want to ever lecture your reader, regardless of what your politics are. Your readers are allowed to have their own politics and ideology, so you never want to make them feel like you're lecturing them. Also, local color. So, for instance, when I write a story in Fort Collins, Colorado, Fort Collins is like a huge brewery town. It's a huge microbrewery town with college students and so I always try to include something like that, even if it's just the traffic on College Avenue, from the kids getting out of school. Or, everybody goes and parties at, the brewery and for free samples on Friday nights. Just stuff like that. That's the local color of the area. Also, the history. So, certain things about the history could come into play. Anything that you think your reader should know about the area or the setting or even the room that they're in, right? I think we talked about this and I said, I view world building like a video game and I take it one chunk at a time as I move through the story, and I'll usually give an overall at first, just so readers can place themselves in the story when it first begins. But then, every scene has a little world building in it as I move through the story. And you don't need to know about the secret underground tunnel under Cathedral City in Chapter 1 because you're not going to get there until Chapter 10, right? So you don't have to worry about any of that other stuff until you get there. So need to know basis. Okay, so how to avoid boring worlds. If it's not relevant to the story, you should leave it out. So, I'm trying to think of an example. So, I know in romance they make a big deal about what kind of car the guy drives. Like, this is always like, he's driving an Aston Martin. Well, it's pretty pretentious in the United States to drive an Aston Martin. So, I try not to dwell on the cars too much. So, that's something I don't. I usually just pick a brand. And sometimes I'll pick like a really shitty car on purpose just to throw people off the trail. But, if it's not going to contribute to your story, don't waste time on it. If nobody needs to know she's toting around a Prada purse, then don't tell them. Just tell them it's designer and it's high-end and it costs blah, blah, blah. You don't have to do stuff like that to build a world or even to build characterization for your character. So again, if it's not relevant to the story and especially to the scene that you're writing when you're describing something, just leave it out and pick the one or two things in that scenario that really do need explaining and find a cool way to talk about it. With that said, there is always a workaround. And if you think something about your world is important, but readers might not feel the same way, your job is to make it interesting. So I have a couple of examples of that. So in my Rook and Ronan series, the first couple of books, Ford and Rook are running steps at Coors Field. You know, when you go into a stadium and you run up and down the steps as exercise. Sounds really fucking horrible to me, but that's what they do. And it's kind of a boring scenario, exercising, right? Like, who wants to hear about that? But there's so much inner dialogue and exposition going on, and there's so much character building going between these two characters, Rook and Ford, as he makes her learn to run these steps with him, that this had really turned into one of the most favorite scenes in the whole series as far as the fans are concerned. And Coors Field was relevant to the story because they're living in this neighborhood, and Coors Field is across the street. Like, you can hear the ball game, and, you know, it's an up-and-coming area, so it's not really a great area in some parts. And the erotic photography studio is right there, immersed in that neighborhood. So that would go with local color and culture, right? So I had to find a way to build up the world, and I used Coors Field to do it. Just because it was next door, it's a good place for Rook and Ford to get away from Ronan, right? Sneaky. Okay, so boarding setting example number 2. In my Dirty, Dark, and Deadly series, Come Back and Coming for You, the main characters, Harper, James, and Sasha, are driving through the Mojave Desert, and they stop at a visitor center. Now, if you've ever seen the fucking visitor center in the Mojave Desert, it's not very interesting. But I made it really interesting, and this turned into the best sex scene in the entire series because of how I combined dialogue, exposition, and the sexy parts to build a world at the same time. So you don't need an opulent setting to hold a reader's interest. You just need to know what to do with it. So be original when you come up with your world building. And boring setting example number 3, a remedial high school classroom. If you're one of those overachievers and you've never seen a remedial high school classroom, it's pretty gross. They usually don't get a lot of money, so everything's broken and it's secondhand and it's an afterthought, and it's not exactly a romantic place. However, if your two main characters are having sex on the teacher's desk, chances are nobody's going to care what your setting is. So you control the excitement level in the story, and don't let the setting dictate what you write. Okay, so I have talked about this series several times, and I'm going to talk about it again today, because I've read it at least 10 times, and I've listened to it on audiobook, I'd say 4 or 5 times. Like once a year, I just break it out and listen to it on audio or read it, and because I love it that much, because I think it's so well done. So this world blew me away, and I loved every stupid, boring detail that all the other reviewers complained about, because I'm his super fan, right? I'm his fan. I'm not his casual reader. I'm his fan. So hopefully, and I think he is not paying any attention to those people, and he just goes along and does his thing because he knows he kicks fucking ass. So this brings us to plotting a series, because I'm going to use Alter Carbon to do that as my example for you. And when you're plotting a series, you're making a promise to build a world that will hold your reader's attention over several books. It doesn't, there's no set number to a series. It could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, or 27. It doesn't matter. But you're going to build a world, and until you end that series, you are in that world. And yes, it can change locations, but you're still in that world, in that character's world. So, plotting a series is plotted the exact same way you plot a book. Meaning, the series has a beginning, the series has a middle, and the series has an ending. And I think that's something that most people don't know, but should. Because if you don't structure your series like you would your book, you're going to get that middle book syndrome, where people just they get halfway through the middle book and they're like, I'm fucking bored of my life, right? And so they put it down, and maybe they come back for the third, and maybe not. So you don't want to lose them in the middle because you didn't plot it correctly. It's your job, okay? So here's how it breaks down if you're doing a 3-book series. Book 1 would be your beginning. Okay, let me back up. So if you're plotting a series, your series has to have a series arc, okay? Something that happens in the beginning, your characters and world and all these world building things change over time to get to the end where there's some kind of resolution. And each book within the series also has this structure, right? So you're going to plot this for every book in the series, and then you're going to plot out the series as a whole. So the character and plot arcs in book 1 are not the series as a whole, okay? I hope that makes sense. And if you don't understand it, feel free to ask me questions because I'm not sure I'm explaining it right. But so if you're writing a 3-book series, we'll look at this graph here. And book 1, you have to have an arc covering all these elements that you put already into your plot structure for just a single book, right? Your series has to have a hook, it has to have a beginning, it has to have a middle with all those ups and down challenges, has to have a middle 50% point where things start going well and people are optimistic. There has to be a crisis and a regroup and a climax and a conclusion. So book 1 would be the beginning, book 2 would be the middle, and book 3 would be the end. And it's really important that you do that because that's the only way you're going to get people through book 2. It's easy, to capture attentions in the beginning, right? Because you have a hook. And then you have a major shift in the story at 25%. And it's easy to kind of keep people going at the end because things are happening so fast and you have all these points that you're hitting. So you don't want to lose them in the middle. And I can't even tell you how many books I put down in the middle. Like, I read one, and I swear to God, it was an audiobook, and it was like 30 minutes away from the end, and I just put it down, and I was like, I just don't care. Like, I think I can figure out what happens, and I'll pick up book 3 in the summer, and I'm pretty sure I didn't miss anything, So you don't want that to happen to you. You want to make sure you plot it correctly. So watch out for boring middle book syndrome. And the way around a boring middle book is to reveal something critical to the overall series plot in each book. That means, like, in book 2, you really reveal something earth-shattering. And I'll give you an example real fast with my Rick and Ronan series, because book 1 is a straight romance. It's Rook is like a down-on-her-luck girl who falls into the opportunity of a lifetime to do erotic modeling for this famous photographer, and his nephew Ronan is the man she's modeling with. And so blah 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 blah, they work out all their problems and happily ever after for now at the end of book 1. Book 2 starts out with a few challenges, but by the time you get to the end of book 2 you realize this is not the story you thought you started, because there's a big twist at the end and shit just starts hitting the fan. And then everybody who made it that far, because I'm not saying I plotted that book perfectly because I didn't, but everybody who made it that far to the end automatically went and clicked over to the next book. And by that time I had them hooked, and they just usually read all the way through until they run out of books. So you want to avoid boring middle book syndrome by introducing something, some kind of revelation about the overall plot in each book to keep people interested. I'm thinking about young adult right now because they have such a propensity to do this with their fucking 3-book series, right? The first one is awesome because they have a little romance going. There's all this conflict between the hero and the heroine, and this is young adult, like sci-fi fantasy. And so you're really into it, and then they get to book 2, and it's like they already had like a premature resolution at the end of book 1. So what do you do with that, right? If the couple gets together in a romance, you have to break them apart again. Well, readers don't really like breaking them apart after they get together, so it's better to keep the conflict going a little bit. And that's why I mentioned Daughter of Smoke and Bone series by Laini Taylor, because she does this especially well in her 3-book series of The Daughter of Smoke and Bone, because she strings that couple along the entire fucking series, and you're like, just kiss her already, fuck's sake. But he doesn't till the very last book. So you have to you have to do that very carefully, and don't lose them in the middle by just, running out of steam. And I think a lot of authors go into a series and they have a great idea and they think, oh, I'll figure out book 2 when I get there. But that's not, I consider myself really, really pretty good at this shit, and it's dangerous for me to do that. So I would say if you're not at a level like I am, you should not do that, right? I think it's dangerous, and I think you have a high chance of painting yourself into a corner. And so you should really try and figure out where your series is going and how it's going to end before you begin. You'll be a lot happier. And it doesn't mean you have to follow through with that. It just means you have a goal, and your goal can change whenever you want. But you will be a lot happier. Okay, so as I said, the plot of a series has an arc. Book 1 is the beginning, Book 2 is the middle, Book 3 is the end. And the series plot is not the same as the book plot. You have to have both to plot a successful series. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the Altered Carbon series plot, and hopefully you're going to see how fucking amazing it is, and you're going to go pick it up. And by the way, this is going to be a Netflix series starting, I think, next year. I think they're filming Altered Carbon this year. So you're going to be able to see this next year on Netflix. So this series has one main character. His name is Takashi Kovacs, and everyone else in the story, everyone is secondary to the point of almost not mattering. So if you get invested in a character, there's a really good chance he's going to die because Kovacs is a little bit crazy. But Morgan masterfully told this story in first person by plotting his series in a very unique way. And I'm going to take you through his 3 books and what he did and why it was so genius. So the first book is called Altered Carbon. And in book 1, Morgan introduces Kovacs, obviously, how he ended up in prison, which is called storage in this book because it's in the future. And their minds have been digitized onto these little like stainless steel discs that they implant in the back of their neck. So they are virtual consciousness. So if you do something bad and you break the law, they take out your disc, throw it in this storage thing, and you basically just live in limbo. I don't even think you're conscious. You're just like in a blackout coma state. And then you wake up whenever they decide your sentence is over, which could be hundreds of years, which doesn't sound so bad because you're like, yeah, you're in prison, but you're not. You're just kind of sleeping. But when you wake up, the world has changed, right? If you're gone for 200 or 300 years, the world has moved on without you. You might not know anybody. They can live forever in this series if you have enough money. You just put your stack into a new body. So storage is kind of a serious thing. And it also deals with his past as a member of, it's called the Envoy Corps, and it's like a Navy SEALs, but they're like Space Marines, they're not well liked because they're just super kind of evil, and they're really good at what they do, which is take down planets. So we come to find out in the very first chapter, he's a criminal. Kovacs is a criminal because he left the Envoy Corps and there's no job opportunities. And he has this girl that he really likes a lot and he's 100% loyal to. They're like partners, and they get busted in the first chapter, and she gets thrown in storage as well. So you learn through this book the reason he quit the Corps, and it's kind of a devastating, life-altering reason. And you meet the people he was somewhat loyal to, and I say somewhat, in underlined black letters because he's not really loyal to anybody but this one girl. And there's a fantastic film noir detective story running through it. So that is the whole plot. This detective story is the whole plot. He has been brought to Earth to solve a mystery, and by the end of this book, the mystery is solved. And also, as his world building goes, of course, he introduces us to Earth in the future. And so it's a lot different than we see it now, and he explains that extremely well. But he also introduces very slightly the extinct Martian culture that we have found on Mars and other planets throughout the universe from this present time to that future time. Okay, so he just barely introduces it using these really small little clever ways. He's just very clever. And also he introduces pretty early Kovacs' hatred for organized religion and his ambiguous moral code, because he does have one. It's just very ambiguous. And his political views, which again, he does have them, but they're all very ambiguous because As I said, he's not a very loyal guy, except to this one girl, and he'll jump ship any chance he gets. So, in Alter Carbon Book 1, this plot wraps up because it's a mystery that needs solving, which is genius, right? It's genius because it's a standalone series book. So you go into the book meeting this guy, he's got a mystery, you go through the motions of solving the mystery, there's big, huge ending, and then bam, over, right? You want to know where he's going next. Like, what's he going to do now? Is he going to get her out of storage? Is he going to save her? What's going on? So almost none of this continues into Book 2, except his personal political views and his religious views. So that's very important. In Book 2, he continues with new people he is somewhat loyal to. The extinct Martian culture is now a major plot point that's about to explode. And, of course, he carries his ambiguous moral code and political views with him. And he also introduces Kovach's tendency to switch sides when people piss him off. Because, man, this guy can go back and forth like nobody's business. And his insane drive to win at all costs, especially when he feels betrayed. So you get a little more character building in this one, and you realize this guy's probably fucking crazy, okay? And you don't know whose side is on through the whole book. So at the end of the book, this plot wraps up, because it's a job that needs finishing. He's hired to do a job, another genius way to plot your way through a series. Book 1 was a mystery that needed solving. Book 2 is a job that needs finishing. And he doesn't continue anything really into the next book except for Kovach's personal, political, and religious views. And, of course, the Martian culture, which is coming up really big. So in Book 3, he continues the new old friends he is somewhat loyal to. The extinct Martian culture is a major plot point again. His ambiguous moral code and political views. And the girl he's loyal to is finally back. She was missing in Book 2, and you kind of forgot about her, but all of a sudden she's back, and it's like the saddest fucking story ever. And so you really kind of get a lot of character building with Kovach in this story, and you come to realize maybe he's not a great guy to everybody, but there are some people in this universe that he is, a hero to. And then Morgan introduces Kovach's home planet, his culture, politics, religion, and just how far he's willing to go to get revenge for the only person he's ever been 100% loyal to. So, this is just a really great series, and it's complete with a satisfying ending. It was very satisfying, even though, you don't get all the answers, but Morgan wraps it up. It's a nice, long denouement, and I just felt satisfied at the end. And we finally realized the series arc is Kovach's character arc, and every word Morgan wrote was leading up to his coming to terms with his evolving moral code, because as the space seal, the Navy SEAL in space, the Envoy Corps, he didn't have a moral code. He wasn't allowed to have a moral code. All he had to do was follow orders. If they told him to go annihilate a planet, he went in and did it. So he has this evolving moral code now. He's forgiving himself and his friends for all the things they've done in the past, and his hatred for organized religion is something he has to deal with, as well as his ambiguous political views, because he keeps running into people. He keeps running into people in this book that have different religious views and different political views that don't match his, but yet he likes these people, and so he takes time to listen to them. And maybe he doesn't change his mind, or maybe he does, but he still has to deal with it. So this series is really great because Morgan never veered from his original premise. This series is about one man coming to terms with his natural ability as a killer and his willingness to do it, his preference to be a loner, and the realization that people are allowed to choose their own destiny, even if it kills them. Because he's kind of doing the same thing that he's so self-righteous about, these other people with their politics and their religion. He's doing the same thing because he chose to be a killer, a soldier. So he has to come to terms with that by the end of the story, and it was just really great. So here's a little graph to show you what I mean about each book has a plot structure, but the series as a whole has one too. So just Book 1 is the beginning, Book 2 is the middle, and Book 3 is the end. And if you plot your series this way, I guarantee you, you'll be happier for it. Don't forget that every book needs a great ending, and so does every series. So this is one reason why I tell you, you really should know how your series is ending, because people expect a lot from you. If you don't have that crisis, regroup, climax, and down, and you're not wowing people in book 3, they're not going to pick you up again, people. You really got to do it. So planning it out ahead of time is not a bad thing. This is an example of a 4-book series. If you're doing more books, you just, make these little boxes shorter, So book 1 would be the beginning, book 2 is to the 50% point, book 3 is from 50% to crisis, and book 4 is like the big climax. So you can split it up any way you want, but just try and plot your books out this way before you start, and you'll be happier for it at the end, believe me. So, a final word about series and romance. There are 2 kinds of series, and this goes for all genres, I think. There's a standalone series where each book in romance has a new couple, okay? And then there's the continuing series where it's all about the same couple in all the books. A continuing series used to be really popular when I first started writing my first series in romance. But it's a really hard sell these days. I think fans and readers have fallen into getting used to the standalone series where they get resolution at the end of book 1 and there's no cliffhanger. And then they go on to another couple with book 2, book 3, book 4. I think they've gotten used to that. That's not saying that you can't do it. You can. And it's not saying that it won't sell, because it could. It all depends on your skill as a storyteller on whether or not this works for you. So don't let any of that stop you, but be aware that standalone series are a lot easier to sell right now than continuing series. Okay, that's it for this week, and I hope you got something good out of it. So we have finished 5 videos, and we're halfway through. And next time we're going to do pacing and suspense. And this is how you get reviews that say, couldn't stop turning pages, stayed up till 3 a.m., woke up at 6 to read this before work. This is how you do it, okay? You got to pace it out, and you got to add in some suspense. Okay, so we'll do that. I think, I'm sorry, I just want to apologize for not putting this up on time. It's a week late. Sorry about that, but I am going to try and get back on schedule and release the next one next Wednesday. I can't promise it because actually I'm in the middle of buying a house right now, and it's stressing me the fuck out, right? So I'll do my best to get that up, pacing and suspense next Wednesday, so you won't have to wait 2 weeks. And again, if you have any questions about any of this, just leave me a comment. I'm happy to answer it. And if you don't want to stop by the blog every 2 weeks to check and see if I posted, just put your email in that little sign up form below, and my feed burner thingy will send you an email when I post on the blog each time. Other than that, we're done. So I'll see you next week with pacing and suspense. Later.